I am glad to be back with you today as we continue a study that we started some time ago called No Filter. And in this particular study, what I am encouraging every one of us to do is to take the lid off and actually deal with honestly the stuff we have been shoving down inside of us. Stuff that we don't want anybody else to know is there. Stuff that we pretend sometimes is not there, and it causes so much problems for us, so many problems for us, because even when we shove these things down, they have a way of coming back and impacting our life. And so this series of messages is really focused on the challenge to be honest with ourselves, to be honest with God, and to be honest with one another. We talked about issues like depression. We've talked about anxiety and the fact that many of us feel the issue of anxiety. We've talked about discouragement and how discouragement impacts our lives. So we've talked about numerous challenges that we face in our life, but my goal has been to kind of release you to be honest about those things. Now, one of the ways that we've done that is that every week I've kind of taken the lid off and I have revealed to you that the person on your right has serious problems. And they may not have shared that with you, but they do. They've got serious problems. And the person on your left has deep issues. And the person in front of you needs counseling, seriously needs counseling. The person behind you possibly needs to be hospitalized. I mean, it's that bad for them. Here's the point. Every one of us, without exception, have challenges. And so it's time that we just quit filtering our life and pretending that everything is okay and learn to be honest with ourselves and learn to be honest with God and get some of this junk out so that we can deal with it. Now, I'll warn you, whenever this stuff starts coming out, it gets messy. But oh goodness, healing comes when we get rid of all this stuff. And so hopefully over the next few weeks, as we continue to talk about issues that we struggle with, we will gain insight into how we can deal with those issues. Well, today we're going to talk about the issue of grief. In fact, I am absolutely convinced that all of us deal with grief. In fact, when we talk about grief, there's only two kinds of people in the world with regard to grief: those who have grieved and those who will. Because every one of us at one time or another will face the reality of grief. But there's a challenge here, a problem, really. I've been a pastor for 41 years, and this is my assessment of pastoring for 41 years. Christians don't grieve well. Now, you would expect me to say the absolute opposite of that, because many of us have heard others say, or we ourselves have said, when we go through difficult times and we face loss and grief, I don't know how anybody goes through these kinds of experiences without God. You've heard that. You may have even said that. But there are some of you who have heard that, and when you face your time of grief and the hurt hits home, you automatically think, well, what's wrong with me? I love God, but this hurts. I love God, and it's the most painful thing I've ever walked through in my life. I love God, and I trust that God is there for me, but I never really understood that grief and the emotion of grieving could impact me physically, that I can physically hurt because of the emotional grief that I experience. You see, because we have heard and sometimes said, I don't know how a person goes through it without God, we have a false understanding that if we have God, we don't hurt. If we have God, we won't walk through grief. If we have God, we are immune to that. Or if we have God, grieving looks different for us than it does others. Well, today we're going to talk about those challenges, and really it's more of a conversation than a message. I've kind of struggled writing out. I usually do a manuscript of my message, and I really struggled to do that. There's not much here in notes. But that doesn't mean that it's a short message. It just means that we're going to have a conversation about this issue, and I hope we can get through it in a manner that is helpful. I want to draw your attention to a fun story in the life of our Lord Jesus that kind of allows us to see the grieving process as it begins to emerge in the heart of two ladies who lost their brother. They had a great relationship with Jesus. The ladies are known, if you're a student of the Bible, their names are Mary and Martha. Their brother is Lazarus. And the Bible describes Jesus' relationship with Mary and Martha and Lazarus this way. He loved them. Now, Jesus loved everybody, but for the Bible to say that he loved Martha and he loved Mary and he loved Lazarus, there's something special about that. Jesus had a special relationship with them. He loved to hang out at their house. He never went to Jerusalem that he didn't hang out at Martha and Mary's house. He spent many a night there. He would bring the disciples with him. Kind of had the relationship with Mary and Martha. He could just barge in with all 12 of his disciples and just hang out. And Mary and Martha kind of fixed something for them to eat, and they would experience that kind of friendship. So it's natural with that kind of relationship, that insight, that knowledge, that kind of firsthand experience with Jesus. When Lazarus gets sick and Mary and Martha send for Jesus, who they know can heal the sick, it just makes sense that Jesus would drop everything and come. But he doesn't. And the way he responds to this story allows us to see behind the scenes and understand that grieving process a little bit. So I want you to turn with me to John chapter 11. John chapter 11, for our time together as we walk through the text, we're going to focus on the verses of Scripture that begin with verse 11, but are 13. But I just kind of want to back up and read earlier just to fill us in on what's going on. So just listen as we walk along. Beginning with verse 1 now, a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and his sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. So the sisters sent word to him saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. Now, just notice the personal nature of this. But when Jesus heard this, he said, this sickness is not to end in death, but for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified by it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he had heard that he was sick, he then stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Now, I don't know, but those two verses just don't seem to match. He loved Mary and Martha and her brother Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick and he was needed, he stays 2 days longer. I would have expected it said he would have left immediately. He would have dropped everything and gone, but he doesn't. He stays. He doesn't immediately respond. Have you ever felt like in a time of crisis when you cried out to God, he just took his merry time? Has there ever been a time in your life when you asked God to come through and he just waited? And you wonder, does he even love me? Does he really? I thought he did. I thought I had a relationship with God. I thought he answered prayer. I thought, well, we got to go on. This is why we'll never finish. Then after he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. And the disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you're going there again? And Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in a day? And if anyone walks in the day, does not stumble, because he sees the light of the word. But if anyone walks in the light, he stumbles or in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. And he said to them, after he had said this to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go so that I may awaken him out of sleep. And the disciples then said to him, Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he'll recover. Now, Jesus had spoken of his death, but they had thought he was speaking of literal sleep. So Jesus then said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. Therefore Thomas, who is called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, let us go so that we may die with him. Boy, there's a rabbit we could chase right here, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to throw it out there so you can chase it on your own. We have a tendency to talk bad about Thomas, don't we? Old doubting Thomas, remember, that had to have proof. But do you notice in this particular text that old doubting Thomas is the first one to say, if we go back to Jerusalem, they're going to kill you. And Jesus said, I'm going. He said, well, let's go die with him. Count me in. I'm ready to die with you. And so Thomas lines up. The other disciples follow. So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off. Many of the Jews who had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. Martha, therefore, when she heard Jesus was coming, went to meet him. But Mary stayed at home. Martha then said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. And Jesus said, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? And she said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, even he who comes into the world. And when she had said this, she went away and called Mary, her sister, saying secretly, the teacher is here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she got up quickly and was coming. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. And the Jews who were with her in the house consoling her, when they saw that Mary got up quickly and went out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. And therefore, when Mary came where Jesus was, she saw him and fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now she says the exact same thing that Martha had said. If you'd have been here, he wouldn't have died. And when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in the spirit, and he was troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. Next verse, shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. If you say that right now, you've just memorized a verse in the Bible. It's the first verse in the Bible I memorized as a kid. You memorize that Jesus wept. What a powerful verse, though. So the Jews were saying, see how he loved him. He said to them, could not this man who has opened the eyes of the blind have kept this man also from dying? So Jesus, also being moved within, came to the tomb. Now it was a cave, and there was a stone lying against it. Jesus said, remove the stone. And Martha, the sister of the deceased, said to him, Lord, by this time there will be a stench, for he has been dead for 4 days. And Jesus said to her, did I not say to you, if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they removed the stone. Then Jesus raised his eyes and he said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but because of the people standing around, I said it so that they may believe that you have sent me. And when he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. Now, the reason Jesus said Lazarus come forth and not come forth is because every dead person would have come forth if he hadn't used his name. He had to get specific and say, Lazarus, come forth. And the man who had died came forth, bound, hand and feet with wrappings, in his face was wrapped around. And Jesus said, unbind him and let him go. You're familiar with this story, but I want you to pay attention to the back story. I want you to look with me and see if we can, from this story, make some determination that would help us in the process of grieving. I've told you that I am convinced in my ministry that Christians are not grieving well, and I believe the number one reason is because they do not understand, number one, the reality of grief. The reality of grief is simply this: every one of us grieve. Grief is not just confined to the loss of a person, a loved one. When I think and speak of grief, we often go to texts and passages like this that talk about the death of someone because grief is real in those moments. But here is the reality. We grieve every time we lose anything. Grief is associated with loss. It doesn't have to be a person that we lost. We can lose a pet and we can grieve. We can lose our job and grieve over the loss of our job. We can lose our health and we grieve over the loss of health. We can lose a friend or friendships and we grieve over the loss of friends. We can lose a way of life, a style of living. We can lose a dream that we had that one day would be fulfilled. Anything that we lose can introduce us into the grieving process. Now listen to me carefully. Even if you are a Christian, when we lose something, we go into a grieving process. This process has been studied by researchers, and it is consistent in every person, whether you're a believer or a non-believer. There are stages that have been identified that we walk through in grief. Now, I'm going to go through these, and I want to try to rush through it because this is not what I want you to understand, the grieving process, but there are some things that I want you to notice about it. What researchers tell us in the process of grieving is that there are 5 different stages of grief that we walk through. The first step that we face is shock. If we discover that we have lost something, I can't believe this happened. I didn't see that coming. Sometimes a person dies in an automobile accident unexpectedly, and we face the shock and the reality that this has happened. It is not something I saw coming. And this kind of shock can literally paralyze me. It takes me a while for me to wrap my mind around that and understand it. Once I begin to understand what is going on, the next thing that generally happens in our emotions as we work through is what researchers refer to as anger, the anger stage. All of a sudden, I am shocked. I face the reality that I've lost something, and now I get mad about it. I'm angry that this person has died. I'm angry, and sometimes that anger for believers is turned toward God. God, why would you do this? It doesn't make any sense. Why would you take my child? Why would you take my husband? Why would you allow this to happen? Why? I thought you gave me that job and I was serving you and I got fired. Why did you let these things happen if you are God? And I want to tell you something. The greater our understanding of the power of God, the greater the potential for us to get mad at him. Because we know God could do something. And he doesn't, and he didn't. So all of a sudden in my grief, I lost my marriage. You want that marriage to work, and all of a sudden I grieve that. Why? Where are you, God? In the course of that, I get angry. And I want to tell you something very quickly. Sometimes we get stuck in one of these stages. There are some of you that got stuck right here. You've been mad at God for years. Because of something you lost in your life. You have never gotten over anger toward God. And you're mad at God, and it has impacted everything that touches your life because of the anger that you have with God and with others. But now, let me go on. Researchers say that usually after anger, we then come to a place, depending on what writers you follow, some refer to this next stage as bargaining. I think for our purposes, guilt kind of captures that next level. What happens is I'm angry and then I feel guilty about it. We even get angry sometimes at the person that dies. I'm mad at them because they left me with a mess that I have and the situation that I'm encountering. I get mad, and then all of a sudden I feel guilty. Why can I get mad at them? They didn't have anything to do with that. It wasn't their fault. Or I'm mad at God, and then suddenly as a Christian I think, boy, that's dangerous. I don't want to be mad at God because he may zap me. You know, he's going to get mad if I'm mad. And so, oh man, I really feel bad about that. And so I go into this guilt phase where I kind of deal with guilt. And from guilt, we go to depression. I felt guilty, now I'm depressed. Walking through this process, 4 stages. The last stage that science has identified in the research of grief is acceptance. ACCEP. Acceptance is that final stage. Now, the reason I drew this for you is very quickly, I wanted you to see this. We have a tendency to want everything to be nice and neat. And if you tell me that there are 5 levels of grief, that is wonderful news, because I have felt shock. Yes, I was angry. Yes, I felt guilty about it. Yes, there was a time of depression. So I'm done. And all of a sudden, what we discover is the next step up here is anger. And we think, wait a minute, I'm starting all over again. Are you serious? It's spelt the same way. It feels the same way. It looks the same way. But this is why I drew this. This is what I want you to notice. You are working through a process of grief, and the anger here is not the same anger as here. You're making progress. You're working. You're going to get there. It may take you a while to get to that place of acceptance. And acceptance doesn't mean that life's going to be the way it has always been. There is a brand new normal that we have to embrace, and it might not be one that we like, but it is the reality of our life as we move forward. So what I want you to understand, first of all, is the process of grief. I want you to understand the reality of grief. There is no way around this. If you're a child of God and you face loss, you got to go through this. There's no way around it. You're not immune to it, and as a Christian, God doesn't somehow just kind of pick you up here and bring you to the place of acceptance where everything's all right. You're going to have to walk through these stages of grief. There's no way around it. In fact, there's a passage of Scripture in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 where the Apostle Paul is writing to the church in Thessalonica, and he says this, I don't want you to be uninformed, brethren, about those who are asleep, talking about those who have died. There were questions about what happens when people die and where do my loved ones go when they're dead. And so Paul is addressing that in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, and he says, I don't want you to be uninformed, brethren, about those who are asleep, so that you, listen to what he says next, so that you will not grieve as do the rest who have no hope. I want you to have facts that are right about this so that you don't grieve the way others do who have no hope. But now listen. Paul did not say, I want you to have the facts so that you will not grieve. He didn't say that. He said, I want you to have the facts so that you grieve different. You have to grieve. There's no way around it. There is no detour around the valley of the shadow of death. In life, you will face loss. In life, things will not always go the way you want them to. And you better learn how to grieve loss because it's a normal part of your life. As a parent, you better teach your kids how to walk through the grieving process so they don't get stuck somewhere. We need to understand that grieving is indeed a reality and there is no way around it. But there is a way through it. And the final thing that I want to talk to you about is what is the right response then to grief if I have to walk through this? What can we learn even from the story before us that helps us? Let me give you 3 steps that I think will help you as you process grief. Number 1, give yourself permission to grieve. Don't be unrealistic. So many of you are unrealistic in the expectations you place on yourself because I don't know how many Christians I've heard say this to me, Pastor, I know that I should be handling this better. Why? I've had ladies come to me, especially widow ladies, after the loss of a husband in 50 years. And almost apologetically, they come to me in their tears, sometimes even at the funeral, and say to me, Pastor, I'm so sorry. I know that I should be handling this better. And I'm thinking to myself, why? You just lost something huge in your life. Man, that was 50 years of a relationship. No. Give yourself permission to grieve. It's okay. It's okay to be shocked, and it's okay for your mind to be fuzzy. It's okay for you to feel like I can't get my mind wrapped around this. It doesn't seem right and real. It's okay for you to be mad. Do you know God's big enough for your anger? He's not in heaven surprised saying, oh man, I didn't know they were going to get mad. God's big enough for your anger. In fact, interesting in the story before us, Jesus hangs out 2 days. He could have got there before Lazarus died. He could have touched him, raised him from his sickness, and he would have been fine. He waited 2 days. When he confronts Martha, you know what she says to him? If you'd have been here, our brother wouldn't have died. Later on, when he sees Mary, she says exactly the same thing. If you'd have been here, our brother wouldn't have died. You know what that makes me think? They said that to each other. I think they talked about it. Now, what we don't have in the Bible, we have the words, but we don't have the emotion. We don't know. We're left to kind of just figure that out, and I don't know that I really know the emotion. It could have been immense sadness. Oh, Jesus. Man, if you'd have been here, he wouldn't have died. I just know. But you know what? It could be anger. They could have been a little mad. Jesus, if you'd have been here, this wouldn't have happened. And I want to tell you this. If the disciples ever let the cat out of the bag, if the disciples ever told Mary and Martha, we received the word that Lazarus was sick 2 days before we ever left to come back, how do you think that would have impacted them? Anger? Listen, give yourself, it's okay to be mad. We don't understand. You know what I say, and I don't have time to develop it, but I say this. I believe the reason that, for death especially, the reason that we have a hard time dealing with loss and death, I'm convinced that we as human beings were never programmed to die. God intended us to live forever. Death is a result of the fall. Death is a result of sin. And we just aren't programmed for it. And I think the reason we have such a hard time for it is because we were created to live forever. We were never supposed to have to deal with this. And all of a sudden we have to, and a part of it is anger. So listen to me, it's okay if you're mad. Now let me just say this to you. If you get stuck there, that's not okay. And it's possible for us to get stuck. Sometimes we get stuck right here and we just can't even function. We can't get out of the fog. And we don't know what to do. We don't know where to go. We're stuck and listen, let me just say this to you. If you ever get stuck in any of these stages as you grieve loss, ask for help. Take the lid off. Quit trying to pretend everything's okay. Reach out to a pastor. It might be one visit with a pastor, and he can put you on our, they can help you with this. Or it may be that if you come to me, I may say, you know what, you need to see a counselor. Let me refer you to a licensed professional Christian counselor that understands this process better than I do, and they can help you. They can help you work through so that you don't get stuck. You don't want to be stuck here. You don't want to be stuck you don't want to be stuck in guilt. Remember we talked about guilt the other day? Guess what? Some of you have that constant guilt that you're dealing with, and it has its origin in loss. and you walked through a normal stage of anger, got mad about it, and now you feel guilty about that, and your relationship with God is in question, or some of you are depressed. You don't want to get stuck in any one of these stages. But we've got to give ourselves permission to grieve. Understand that life and loss hurts. It's a kick in the gut, and there's not any way around that. Well, let me go on. We don't have a lot of time. Second thing that I want to encourage you to do is hold on to the facts. We have a tendency when we walk through this to just, we're trying to process so much stuff that we end up forgetting the facts. For me, I'm just going to share with you, I told you this is a conversation. Let me just share with you what I do. There are 3 facts that kind of keep me grounded. There are 3 things that I always come back to in my walk. In fact, these 3 things, when Paul said in 1 Thessalonians, I don't want you to grieve as those without hope. For me, I focus on the promises of God, the presence, and the power of God. For me, that equals hope. When I don't understand things, I have to process and say, but God, I thank you that there are some promises that I can hold to. And here are the promises. There are many of them in the Bible, but the Bible says if you struggle with something, Jesus said, ask, seek, knock. Ask and keep on asking, Carroll. Knock and keep on knocking. Seek and keep on seeking. God, I don't get this. It doesn't make any sense to me. And you know what? Sometimes it will never make sense to you. But there are other promises in the Bible that encourage me. That God will use all things that happen for my good. Some of the best things that have ever happened to me are also the worst things that ever happened to me. Some of the greatest challenges that I have faced in life that I would never wish on anybody else and never want to go through myself again have been opportunities for me to see tremendous change in my life, directionally, spiritually. The promises of God are so settling for me. One of the things that I say, if you're around me very much and if you hear me pray, if I pray for you in situations that we face together when we're walking through crisis, you'll always hear me say this: God, I find great comfort in the fact that this is not a surprise to you. I am so shocked I never saw this coming, but thank you that you're not in heaven saying, wow, I didn't see that coming. Thank you that you knew this was going to happen before I was ever born, and you have prepared things for this moment, and you're still in control. And I don't see your hand at work, and I don't see your control, and it doesn't make any sense to me. And in the midst of my grieving and all of these emotional roller coaster that I'm on, I thank you that you're in control. And I hold to the promise that you have a plan. Your plan is right and perfect and good, and you can be trusted. Thank you that you're with me. Your presence is there with me. You will never leave me or forsake me. Thank you that even though it feels like I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death all alone, but the reality is you're with me. And I trust you to be with me, and I thank you for that. And let me just tell you that there are times when we're in the darkness where it doesn't seem like he's with us, and we just have to, by faith, acknowledge the fact that he is. God, I know you're here. I don't hear your voice. I don't sense your nearness, but I know you're with me, and I thank you that you're with me and that I'm not alone as I walk through this experience. And thank you that you have the power to enable me to go through this, because I can't do it myself. I need your power. I need your grace, amazing grace. I need your strength, because I can't do this on my own. It's all I can do to put one foot in front of another. So God, thank you that you're going to give me the power to do that, the grace to do that, the strength to do that. Today I get up trusting you, and I'm going to take every step trusting you. And I'm going to find your grace sufficient. And there's hope. I never will forget a year after my mom died. I always try to remember anniversary dates. because they sneak up on us and they can be big moments in the grieving process. And it was an anniversary date of my mom's death, and so I drove from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where we lived, to Natchitoches, a little town where my mom and dad were living. I remember going to see my dad, and we didn't say much. We just kind of sat together, and toward the end of the conversation, I said this to him: "Dad, how are you doing?" Really. Not with a lid on, "Oh, I'm fine, I'm good." No, Dad, it was a take the lid off question. How are you really doing? It's been a year since Mom's been gone. And he said something to me that was really fun. He said, "Well, I've made friends with it." And I said, "What?" He said, "I've made friends with it." I said, "Okay, I don't have a clue what that means. What do you mean you made friends with it?" And he said this: "It never goes away. It's always with me. Every morning when I get up, I'm reminded she's not there. Every time I watch a TV program and there's something that comes up on the screen, I'll reach over to say something to her and she's not there. But I'm not crying all the time. And I can smile and I can laugh and I can have those memories with joy because I've made friends with it." You never get over loss, but we do move forward. You never get over it, but we do move forward. And we make friends with it, and we find God's power sufficient to sustain us in those moments. It's there that we have hope. Third thing, and then we're done. If you're walking through grief, share the load, please. The reason some of you get stuck here is because the lid's on. And this stuff has to be shared. And when I give you some of this stuff, then it's less in here. And you carry it with me. You know what Paul says in 1 Thessalonians? Comfort one another with these words. And what Paul said to the church in Corinth, he said, "Hey, the very comfort you find from others that helps you and sustains you in those difficult times, use that to help other people who are walking through the same thing." Mary and Martha had people with them that went to the tomb, crying with them. And Jesus himself, knowing full well that he was going to bring Lazarus back from the dead, when he confronted the reality of the loss of someone he loves so much, the shortest verse in the Bible tells us he wept. Now, why did he weep? He knew he was going to bring him back to life. Because sometimes even bringing them back to life, even knowing that they're going to be brought back to life, doesn't take the hurt away. You may have loved ones you know are in heaven, but it doesn't take the hurt away. It's still here. We move through it. We move through it with hope. We know we'll see them again. But share the load. Comfort one another. We've got a ministry in our church that's called Grief Share. And that's what it's all about, to help you find a place where you can share that grief with other people. And they'll tell you, "Hey, I felt that. I went through that. That's not unusual. That's normal. That happens." And you're going to get through it. One of the fun ministries we have in our church is a group of ladies call themselves the Never Alone Ladies. Ladies who have lost their husbands. They know what it's like to lose a husband after a long, long marriage because they've been there. And you know what happens whenever a person in our church loses a husband? They get there before we do. And they put their arms around those women, and I don't know what they say, sometimes nothing. They know you don't have to say anything sometimes, just be there. And because you know they've been there, oh my goodness, it makes all the difference in the world. We all grieve. So take the lid off and let somebody help. Take the lid off and help somebody. If you've gone through loss and you need to be looking for people who are going through the loss you've already gone through and come from, because you're in a position to put your arms around them and say, you're going to get through it. I did, and you will, and it's going to be okay. Let's take the lid off. Give yourself permission to grieve. In the process of your grief, hold on to the facts, the promise, the presence, the power, share the load. And I believe we'll find the strength sufficient to maintain. Father, thank you for the message you've given us today, the opportunity to look at something that we all face. There are some that are walking through this today, some that are stuck in some of these different levels. And I pray that today would be the day that we let go of that to move forward as you lead us. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. I want you to listen now to a song, and as we have opportunity to process what we have talked about in our moments, we just respond and let God speak to us. And the conversation that we've had is an opportunity for you to do that. And you can just remain seated, but I'm going to stand here at the front, and if you want somebody to pray with you, or if there's a need in your life, or maybe something has been stirred from what we've talked about, I'd love the opportunity to pray with you and to share with you in these moments. So let's just listen as we process what God's telling us to do with what we've heard today.
I have lost my appetite, and a flood is welling up behind my eyes. So I eat the tears I cry. And if that were not enough, they know just the words to cut and tear and cry when they ask me, where's your God? Why are you downcast, oh my soul? Why so disturbed within me? I can remember when you showed your face to me. As the deer pants for water, so my soul thirsts for you. And when I survey your splendor, you so faithfully renew, like a bed of rest for my fainting flesh. I am satisfied in you. So let my sighs give way to songs that sing about your faithfulness. Let my pain reveal your glory as my only real rest. Let my losses show me all I truly have is you. 'Cause all I truly have is you. So when I'm drowning out at sea, and your breakers and your waves crash down on me, I'll recall your safety scheme. You're the one who made the waves, and your side went out to suffer in my place, and to tell me that I'm safe. So why am I down? Why so disturbed? I am satisfied in you. Yes, I am satisfied.